It's 29 days in February. GM. GM. Today's Tuesday, the 27th of February. Coming towards the end of the month. We have a leap year, of course, this year. So it's 29 days in February. GM to anyone born on the 29th of February. You get to live 4 times as long as the rest of us. Lucky. So here are the paths. Actually, the funny thing is, there was if you remember the squiggly red path that I'd drawn with the brush, it's actually followed that, where it did just pop back inside. A quick dip, and then away it goes. Anyway, we can get rid of all this, as these are just now redundant. We didn't get 50k, we didn't get 48k, so really, really strong. That was all we got. We got that little sweep of the lows. Pumped, broke out. We have had over 500 million of ETF flows, which is actually kind of interesting. I'm really intrigued by IBIT. The net inflows are actually quite low. So for BlackRock, 118 million, which, by the way, is not low, but it is their second lowest in this kind of 2-week period since the 12th of February, which is very interesting since the volumes were super high. The second highest day of volume overall, next to the launch day. I think this day is an anomaly. I'm pretty sure that is something. Sorry, that's the launch day, and that's always going to skew the volume figures a bit. You had a lot of grayscale selling on that day, and I'm not sure if this is entirely accurate because the guys from Bloomberg said that yesterday was higher than every other day except the first day. So I'm calling it for that. I would trust what they say. They have the Bloomberg terminal and all the accurate volume data. So in terms of holdings, GBTC's holdings continue to decrease, right? So they used to have 650,000. Now they have 444. But as you can see, BlackRock are second, filling up to 125,000. So BlackRock have almost got a Michael Saylor's worth of Bitcoin accumulated within, 2 months? Not even 2 months. A month and a half. Fidelity, almost 100,000. And then the rest have slightly less, but as you'd expect, obviously. But there is no two ways about it. This is the most successful ETF launch in history. And the FOMO hasn't really even begun, as crazy as it sounds. Now, that doesn't mean that we just go up only forever. Of course, that's always not going to be the case. But I see, really, there's not a whole lot here. Between that 48k and 58k pivots, there is a gap of volume. There is a gap of just not much price action has happened in those levels. If you look at it on the weekly perspective, anytime it reaches 48, it kind of teleports to 58. And at 58, it flushed all the way back down, and then it ripped all the way back up. And it tried to hang around for a little bit, but it couldn't really hold reliably above 58 in early 21. It would drop all the way back to 48, which was solid support, back to 58, then all the way down. Same on the way back up. Touched it briefly, but then from 48 just straight through above 58. And then when we lost 58, straight back down. So that's what you mean by saying there's a gap in volume and a gap in the previous. If you look at the volume profile as well, there's very, very little trading that would have happened at that area. So like if we look at, where is my fixed range volume profile here? I'll just look at it for any time we were above this 40k level in these areas. You can see here what I mean by the gap, right? So around that 48k level, we had a big cluster of volume. In between there and 58, there's really this area where there's a gap as it dips in, and that's what we're running through. So up into our next resistance is right where we're at now. My expectation, as you know, this is just fucking perfect. Could not be happier. Could not be in a better position. Could not be more bullish. But of course, there's going to be dips at some point. I still see people talking about dips, right, as if they're due to happen. And it's funny because I remember last cycle, it wasn't like this. Like when price was climbing up towards all-time highs, people were focusing on all-time highs. There's always a few bears, but this is more of a disbelief rally than last time. probably by virtue of the fact of how quickly it's happening, how early in the halving year, how early in the cycle that is happening. Remember, the halving in 2020 was over here. That was our halving in May of 2020. And, we are currently like equivalent. We're at an equivalent level of about here, 15 or 16K. And it's still like 2 months pre-halving. So we're absolutely moving ahead of schedule if you're looking at like the 4-year cycle. But again, 4-year cycle doesn't have to mean anything anymore. It's a narrative, yeah. But with the ETF flows, I just think that what I've talked about for weeks, probably months now, there just are not enough Bitcoin. There is a supply shortage. This is how Bitcoin was literally coded, and it's hardwired to have that. The number of Bitcoin is decreasing every year because you've got the halving, which is producing 900 Bitcoin per day. That's going to drop to 450 after April. And currently the ETFs are like they're just fucking hoovering all that up and then some. Right? Yesterday was another 500 million, which if you take an average price of 54K, that's 9,200 Bitcoin. So let's call it 9,000. So yesterday alone, the net inflows was 10 times greater than the new issuance of Bitcoin. There just are not enough Bitcoin. It's a massive supply shock. And that is not going to, like, that's set to increase because there's going to be fewer Bitcoin being mined. And the demand, it doesn't even have to, you don't have to stay at, 9,000 BTC per day. But if you stay above 450, that's eating up all the new Bitcoin issuance. Then a lot of Bitcoin's lost. Like millions of BTC are lost forever, right? Satoshi's wallet has 1 million. There's an estimate of 2 to 4 million other BTC that have been lost through hacks or lost keys or people dying, right? All this kind of stuff. You cannot get that back. You can't get those back. So in total, there's supposed to be 21 million Bitcoin, but when they're all mined, there might only be 15 or 16 million that are actually ever fully available to be traded. And this is how Bitcoin works. And then we're also running towards gold and catching gold. And the outflows of gold ETFs have been huge this year. And it's no surprise that it's almost a direct inverse correlation. As Bitcoin's ETF flows have risen, gold's ETF flows have dropped back. And investors are exiting gold to enter Bitcoin. They just are, right? And it's not to say that gold is dead or done. Gold serves a very important purpose and always will. But Bitcoin will catch it. And it can catch it in one of two ways. Gold can stay the same and Bitcoin can catch its market cap, which would be like a 10x increase from here for Bitcoin. So that'd be 500,000 BTC and gold doesn't move. Or if gold goes up, Bitcoin has to go up more. Or gold could actually lose. And over time, like we're talking years here, this is not going to happen in this cycle, in my opinion. We're talking over the next decade. Gold could genuinely lose market share. It might not be 13 trillion. It might drop to 10 trillion and Bitcoin might replace it. Even if it doesn't, right? And it doesn't have to this time. Just to get to 1/5 of gold would put Bitcoin at about 2.5 trillion market cap, which is about 125, 130K BTC. So, there's so much room for BTC to grow. And even with the fact that it's going vertical, it's still very, very early in the grand scheme. So when you look at it like this, obviously you think, well, this is fucking crazy. This is going up only. There's no pullbacks. What do we do here? Well, you just stay long. And then if you're looking at lower time frames, my expectation is that we see a sell-off before the halving. The halving currently is, I know that the time frames are a bit all over the place, but let's just say 20th of April was the first estimate. So let's say it's roughly around then. I'm expecting that probably once we get I think we will touch this 58K pivot level. And then you've got the big round number of 60. And that's one area I'm looking at for resistance. Because above there, you do have some serious resistance, right? You've got people who bought in March and April of 2021. And you've got people who bought in October, November of 2021 that are just brutally underwater and have always been. And we can slip through this gap in volume where we are now. But I think, especially if it just goes straight up, and if we just have minimal pullbacks and up into this area, and then it starts to go sideways, that is where I would expect to see a potential for some kind of deeper correction pre-halving, and then after the halving, it sort of reaccumulates and grinds up and goes higher. But even with all this, like you're talking about all-time high, that's what everyone's looking at next. And all-time high can happen. Just momentum is so powerful in Bitcoin. We could just blast all the way there. But if we go to all-time high pre-halving, I would absolutely expect a pullback from there, especially if it just goes straight up. So I'm looking at that and thinking, is that going to happen? I mean, Bitcoin's open interest is like, it's not showing signs of over leverage on the long side at the moment, because OI just by itself is rising. But you can see this, that every time there's these pumps, it's dropping. And then we hit again and it's dropping. So these are shorts. Shorts are getting squeezed out. There isn't a massive amount of longs getting added. Here we probably have seen about 500 million since this morning, and on this kind of little dip. Is that predominantly longs or shorts? Well, it remains to be seen. But it seems like at the moment we're in this phase where people are actually still fading it. And it makes sense, because when Bitcoin has this momentum, people who are sidelined will remain sidelined, because what else can they do, right? They can't get long because they're waiting for a dip. But if the dip doesn't come, they're more likely to actually short it than anything. You have to understand, when people are in bad positioning, it's really hard for them to change their mind and think, I should get long Bitcoin at 57. They just can't think getting long at 57 is a good idea. So what do? They short it. And what happens? Well, they did the same. They shorted 53, they shorted 55, they shorted 57, and so far they're just getting wrecked and wrecked and wrecked. So funding has obviously spiked up. Big increase of funding there. Altcoin funding is high. Altcoin open interest is up, 3 billion from the lows. Bitcoin is up only about a billion off the lows. So the Bitcoin move itself is very much spot driven, and that's so healthy. Definitely altcoins are there is a little bit more froth in the altcoin market. As you can see, the altcoin OI is smashing away to, I think it's new all-time highs. Yeah, this is the highest that altcoin open interest has ever been. Funding nowhere near what it was in 2021, but the open interest is what matters. Those positions are opening, and they're opening quite rapidly. So I've got one eye on an altcoin pullback at some point for sure. But if you look at total 3, it looks really healthy. Total 3 is just, I mean, you look at it from this perspective, we're in this recovery phase, which I've talked about now since all the way down here. And this year is where the altcoin total 3 cap makes its move towards the 2022 open, which is up at about 870 billion. And we're still only at 575. So it doesn't have to go up in a straight line, but it will just, I think, grind its way up there. And we had a couple of, I think it was a daily over here. Yeah. Talking about this, if we flipped out this level and held it, that we would push higher, the red paths. We followed the red path. We didn't get the blue path. We still can. There still can be pullbacks and all of that. But again, looking at it in context of the trend bands, we're just holding them and grinding up. We're just kind of back over at one of these levels. We're sort of breaking out. I would look at it and say probably something like this. We've broken out and push higher, and then you have a flush back, and then you chop, then you push. And I think after, if there's a push up and then there's a chop back and we have a bit of a shakeout, I would say the next time that there's a new high made, that might be the part where you see an actual deeper correction for alts, which again depends on Bitcoin, depends on the halving and all that. But yeah, the play here is to be spot long, as always. If you're spot long, you're safe. If you're spot long, you're riding the market. You can't get liquidated. You can't get stopped out. You're not putting yourself in a position to lose your money, which is the most important thing. And however it moves, I think that the eventual goal is to move all the way up here. I'll just take a quick look at total 3 minus the altcoins. I thought I had it saved there. No, I'll do total 3 minus USDT minus USDC. It generally doesn't look much different. Minus DAI, just taking out the stables, so we can look at just the coins. And yeah, same thing, right? Same chart basically, but excluding altcoins, or sorry, excluding stable coins, this is just a market that's really healthy. It's broken out, it's retested. I mean, you cannot get a better breakout and retest than that. I talked about this. If you go back, I don't know exactly when, but you'll remember I've talked about this several times about the Wall Street cheat sheet, and that like this is exactly what we've seen. We have this. Copy this over. This is the disbelief rally, right? Uh, not reload. Sorry, paste it. There we go. Right, disbelief rally. You come down through anger and depression, and then you start to rally up here. You have your sell off. There's the disbelief rally, sell off into the lows here, and then we're pushing. So we're heading towards hope and in towards optimism. It doesn't feel like it because when you're in the market, it seems like everything's super euphoric, but most people just aren't aware this is happening or they're ignoring it. And so be patient, play the long game. This is going to go much, much, much longer than people think. There's already talk about, oh, this is going to be a shorter cycle. We're all fucked. I mean, it doesn't look like that to me. When you have a Bitcoin led market where total looks like that, right? And total three looks like this. That's a Bitcoin led market. That's a market where BTC is significantly leading, right? Where it's already up towards its 2022 highs. And that's an interesting level there when it touches. When it touches off that previous March 2022 high, that's a key level to watch. And, Bitcoin dominance. Talked about this yesterday with that nice turnaround, really nice turnaround in Bitcoin dominance. As we look at it here, the weekly BTC dominance is just strong as fuck. And I think there's another leg to come on this towards 60%. As Bitcoin is really stealing the show again. And all I can say is that in all my years of trading, anytime you see this, where especially something we had where Ethereum had been outperforming, right? Ethereum had been pushing higher and obviously still doing great, but Ethereum had been outperforming Bitcoin. And everyone was like, oh, is this bad? If Ethereum runs and if Bitcoin's lagging, then it leads to a sell off. But in an early bull, when you see that, which we exactly saw, instead of the Bitcoin pullback, Bitcoin started pumping again. That's just a clear bullish sign. So we're looking great from that perspective. From altcoins, and you see ETH BTC now rejecting off the resistance. I talked about this. I think I've got some drawings there. Yeah, there was the path I was expecting. It was either going to pull back from slightly lower or just from wherever, but up into here. People get themselves fully into Ethereum, then it underperforms a little bit, chops around before the halving, and then after the halving is probably when Ethereum has its bigger run against BTC, because then BTC narrative is lesser for the near term, and everyone looks at the Ethereum ETF as potential. Another thing I talked about was we're going to hear and we're going to find out about big buyers, right? In April, I think it's in March and April, or maybe it'll be quarterly, so it'll be after March. So once you get into April and May, you're going to see a bunch of filings from companies and large players who have to report. So they're publicly traded, or they just want to, fill their bags and then shill them. Billionaires, massive companies, that stuff's going to come out. You're going to see who's actually putting their weight behind Bitcoin. It's not just fucking your granny and granda's, 401k that's buying ETFs. There are going to be big players who are buying into this. And that's going to just, again, catalyze the market to have even greater belief in Bitcoin. And it's really, really, really hard. Like, even last cycle, as crazy as it was, because when we had, all of these moves throughout Bitcoin's history, and it just, if I go log chart, it just kept coming back. But everyone was like, oh, Bitcoin, yeah, it's a scam, and it's dead, and it's just a bubble, and now it's dead. It's like tulip mania. Oh, and it was only COVID money printing, and now it's dead, and FTX scammed everyone. And now it's back again. Like, how many times has Bitcoin come back from the dead before people just say, this thing won't die? This is an adoption curve. And I don't think there's any way to deny it right now. I mean, we've said this all along. Like, fucking, if you've been in crypto, you know this. Every time it gets to the bottom, you're like, great, cheap Bitcoin. But the average person, they just can't deny it anymore. It's totally undeniable. Now, with that being said, the next best place for you to get long on whatever you're trying to buy is on some kind of 20 or 30% correction on Bitcoin, plus a 40 or 50% correction on whatever altcoins it is. There's going to be one of those. It won't happen right away because typically it goes higher and higher and higher and grinds and grinds and grinds. But there will be some kind of correction on BTC at some point. Now, it's not long since we had it, 25% on Bitcoin, 23%, plus alts. There's plenty of alts down 50, even 70%. We had that just a few weeks ago. So there's no need for it to happen right away. However, there will be one at some point. And there will be a point at which people think, for me, what I'm waiting next on is, when is the moment where people say, that was it, that was the fast cycle, it's now over? Because I can already see that this is coming. This is what they're going to say. I would think if it actually does hit all-time highs and then pull back, I would think that would be when it would be the time to happen. So we rally into the halving, and it takes all-time highs and then has a deeper correction, like something like that. This is not time frame specific, but if it hits all-time high, then has a significant 30 or 40% correction, 30% correction, that I think is when people would say, oh, that was it. That's like the last chance for the bears. They're like, oh, well, I was wrong about 30K rejecting. I was wrong about 40K. I was wrong about 50K. And I was wrong about 58K. But I'm right now because, oh, look, it rejected all-time high. Oh, Bitcoin doesn't do this. And that is your best buying opportunity, whenever that may be. Whether it does go to all-time highs, whether it happens before it, nobody knows, right? No one knows exactly where that's going to be. But there will be a moment when people think it's all over, or they think it went too high or went too fast or any of that kind of nonsense. But don't expect the dip to be that deep. I completely believe, like for absolutely 100%, I believe that Bitcoin will be above 100K, if not 150, 200, 250, and eventually 500 or a million. Not this cycle necessarily, although I do believe Bitcoin and ETH are going to be the big winners of this cycle, more so than alts in general. There's always going to be 100x alts, don't worry about that. But this is like the big institutional Wall Street adoption cycle for Bitcoin, and probably ETH if it gets the ETFs. That is the perfect setup for it to go much, much higher than people think. So it looks like it's going just straight up. You go to a monthly chart, it is literally just going straight up. But it's still lower than what it should be, right? Bitcoin should not be $1 trillion asset. It should be 2, 3, 4, 5 trillion on the way to catching gold. It is better than gold in every single way for the modern era, for the 21st century. And I think other people know that, and they understand that too, and they're going to position accordingly. So if there are, 20%, 30% dips, they're buying opportunities for Bitcoin. A 50% crash, I wouldn't be holding my breath on that for Bitcoin in this cycle. All of that stuff can come after as well. Like that's again what people don't remember. It's like if we go to like 150 or whatever, way up, that's when you have like your massive correction. That's when you have like your huge bear market dip and sideways for years. Like this can all just happen in one move. Now this is on a monthly. So when you zoom into the weekly or the daily, there's dips in between. There's 10s, there's 20%. But this is how Bitcoin moves. It's momentum driven. And again, I'm not saying that we just straight blast up there, but don't be surprised if it just keeps grinding higher. There's the two things. Don't be surprised if Bitcoin has a big pullback, because Bitcoin can do it. And don't be surprised if Bitcoin just grinds up relentlessly, because Bitcoin can do it. These are the two things we do know about Bitcoin. One, in a bull market, it can just keep going up and up and up and up with shallow dips. And two, it can absolutely have big corrections. But this 50% crash you had in 2021 was literally China banned crypto. They banned mining. All the miners had to leave. The hash rate plummeted. That was a big systemic shock in the middle of a bull market. we had never had that before. In Bitcoin bull markets of old, when there was no major FUD, it was Bitcoin does its entire run with almost no pullbacks, and then it has a brutal bear market crash. Right? So a lot of people look at this and think this has to happen again, but China can't ban crypto again. it's not going to work this time. Bitcoin mining has broadly migrated now over to North America, and regulatory is absolutely set up for Bitcoin. Maybe not so much for alts. The US are still trying to attack altcoins, but they can't. They can't defeat Bitcoin. Gensler literally admitted it. He admitted defeat. He said, "Oh, the courts told me I can't reject it." BlackRock are now involved and marketing it and shilling it. It's just, those type of headwinds are out of the way, and we've got more tailwinds for Bitcoin. So it's all looking good from a high time frame perspective. So my view would be staying fully spot long, Bitcoin on alts, looking to buy on dips if you get any, looking to trade in between the levels if there's setups, and otherwise, just sit back and enjoy the show. So that's it, GM. I'll see you all later on the live stream, 5 p.m. UTC.